The 18-year-old girl sits trembling in the corner booth of Tucker's Diner, her white cane propped against the red vinyl seat. The rumble of Harley-Davidson engines grows steadily louder outside, rattling the windows like thunder before a storm. Grace Stone glances through the glass, her weathered hands tightening around the coffee pot as she counts the motorcycles gathering in the parking lot. 10, 15, 20 chrome beasts reflecting the afternoon sun. The young woman's head tilts at each new arrival, her unseeing eyes wide with recognition and terror. "Honey," Grace says softly, approaching the booth with the practiced calm of someone who's weathered 35 years of life's storms. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" The girl nods, tears streaming down pale cheeks. Grace sets down the coffee pot and slides into the booth across from her, maternal instincts blazing despite knowing nothing about this stranger except that she's clearly in danger. Outside, the motorcycle engines multiply like angry wasps. I believe so many of us understand that feeling, wanting to protect those who can't protect themselves, don't we? Hit like if you also believe courage isn't measured by strength, but by heart. Subscribe to explore more stories about real people, ordinary folks doing extraordinary things. If you want to support inspiring stories like this continuing to be told, the thanks button will make us stronger in spreading these beautiful values. Because what Grace is about to face will test every limit of human courage. Emma Wade. That's how she introduces herself 20 minutes earlier, her voice soft but steady as Grace refills her coffee cup for the third time in an hour. The name hits Grace like a physical blow. She nearly drops the pot, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Wade, Joey Wade's daughter. "Your father," Grace whispers, sinking into the opposite seat without invitation. "Joey Wade?" Emma's face crumples slightly, the mask of independence she wears so carefully slipping for just a moment. "You knew him?" Everyone in Millbrook knew Joey Wade, not personally, but by reputation. The Death Riders member who tried to go straight, married a sweet librarian named Sarah, had a baby girl born blind. Grace remembers the whispers, the speculation when Joey started showing up at church functions, when Sarah would bring baby Emma to story time at the library, when Joey got that job at Henderson's garage, fixing honest folks' cars instead of stolen ones. She remembers the accident 3 years ago, too. Grace studies Emma's face, noting details she missed before. The way the girl's eyes don't quite track movement, but seem to follow sound with uncanny precision. How she navigates the diner's obstacles without stumbling. How she found the bathroom earlier without asking for directions. There's intelligence in those unseeing eyes, a sharp awareness that suggests this young woman sees far more than most people with perfect vision. "Tell me what's wrong," Grace says, her voice dropping to the tone she uses with her own 16-year-old daughter when the world gets too heavy. "Tell me why you're scared." Emma's fingers wrap around the warm coffee mug like it's an anchor. "They've been watching the house. I can feel them circling, getting closer every day. Grandma thinks I don't notice, but I hear everything. The way conversations stop when I enter a room. Phone calls that end too quickly. The sound of motorcycles driving past too many times to be coincidence." The girl takes a shaky breath, and Grace reaches across the table to cover her hand. Emma's skin is ice cold, despite the diner's warmth. "Dad left something behind when he died, something important. I don't know what it is, but they want it bad enough to hunt down a blind girl whose only crime was being born into the wrong family." Grace glances toward the front window, where the first motorcycle has appeared in the parking lot. The rider hasn't removed his helmet, but she can feel eyes watching them through the glass. Her stomach clenches with the familiar sensation of danger approaching. The same feeling she had during those last terrible months with her ex-husband, when every sound in the hallway could mean another night of violence. But Emma Wade is not her daughter, and Grace Stone has no obligation to risk her own safety for a stranger. Logic screams at her to call the police. Let the authorities handle whatever mess Joey Wade left behind. Logic has never been Grace's strong suit. "How long since your mother passed?" she asks instead. 13 months, 2 weeks, 4 days. Emma's voice cracks slightly. Cancer took her fast, faster than the doctors promised. One day she was making me breakfast. The next she couldn't lift her head from the pillow. Dad's been gone 3 years, and now it's just me and Grandma Rose in that big empty house. The loneliness in Emma's voice resonates in Grace's chest. She knows that particular ache, the hollow sensation of being the only adult in a world that demands you be stronger than you feel. She's lived it every day since her divorce, raising Katie alone while working double shifts and pretending everything's fine. "The police won't help," Emma continues, her voice barely above a whisper. "I called them yesterday when I saw the same motorcycle parked across from our house for the 3rd day running. They said they can't investigate Death Rider's activities without evidence of actual wrongdoing. Said if I felt unsafe, I should consider relocating." Grace's jaw tightens. Relocating? As if an 18-year-old blind girl and her elderly grandmother can just pack up their lives and disappear because the local authorities are too intimidated to do their jobs. The anger burns familiar in her chest, the same righteous fury she felt watching other women suffer in silence, accepting cruelties because the system promised them nothing better. "What do you think your father hid?" she asks. Emma shrugs, but there's calculation in the gesture. "Something valuable enough to kill for. Dad wasn't perfect, but he loved Mom and me more than anything in the world. He wouldn't have left us vulnerable unless he thought whatever he was protecting would keep us safe eventually." The rumble outside grows louder. 2 motorcycles now, their engines idling in perfect synchronization. Grace can see the riders through the window, leather-clad figures who radiate menace even from a distance. Her hands shake slightly as she refills Emma's coffee. Muscle memory from years of domestic violence making her hyper-aware of threats and escape routes. "Listen to me carefully," Grace says, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "I'm going to lock the front door and flip the sign to closed. We're going to call my daughter and make sure she stays at her friend's house tonight. Then you're going to tell me everything you remember about the night your father died." Emma's face goes pale. "You don't understand what you're getting involved in." "Honey, I've been involved since the moment you walked through that door looking like my Katie after a nightmare." Grace stands, smoothing down her apron with hands that have grown steadier with purpose. The Death Riders want to intimidate a blind teenager. They're about to learn what happens when you threaten someone under Grace Stone's protection. The words surprise her as much as they do Emma. Grace has spent years avoiding confrontation, choosing safety over principle, keeping her head down and her opinions quiet. But looking at this frightened girl, brilliant and brave despite her vulnerability, something fundamental shifts in her chest. Some battles are worth fighting, even when you're outgunned. She walks to the front door, turns the lock with a decisive click, and flips the sign to "Closed." Through the glass, she makes eye contact with one of the motorcycle riders. He revs his engine in response, a clear message that they've been seen and noted. Grace gives him a small wave as if greeting a regular customer, then closes the blinds. "Now then," she says, settling back into the booth across from Emma, "start from the beginning." Emma's story unfolds slowly, punctuated by the growing rumble of motorcycles outside and the occasional rattle of windows as more riders arrive. By the time she finishes, Grace counts at least 8 distinct engine sounds, maybe more. The Death Riders are making their presence known without technically doing anything illegal. A strategy that speaks to their experience with intimidation tactics. "Dad changed after I was born," Emma says, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup in endless circles. "Mom said he looked at me in the hospital nursery and realized he wanted to be the kind of man his daughter could be proud of. He started distancing himself from the club, taking legitimate work, talking about moving us somewhere clean and safe." Grace listens, noting how Emma's voice changes when she speaks about her father. Less fear, more love and loss. This wasn't a man who abandoned his family for criminal pursuits. This was someone trying to escape that life for their sake. "The other riders didn't like it," Emma continues. "They'd show up at our house demanding Dad participate in runs, threatening to hurt Mom and me if he didn't cooperate. I remember hiding in my bedroom closet while angry voices filled the living room, wondering why the scary men were always so loud and mean. But he managed to leave eventually?" "Not exactly." Emma's expression darkens. "He never officially quit the Death Riders. You don't just walk away from that life. But he stopped participating in their activities, focused on being a husband and father instead. For almost 2 years, things were good. We went to church, had family dinners, took vacations to the lake. Dad taught me to identify birds by their songs, helped me navigate the world without sight." The wistfulness in her voice breaks Grace's heart. This girl lost not just a father, but the only person who truly understood how to help her thrive in a seeing world. The protective instinct that's been building in Grace's chest intensifies, maternal love extending naturally to include this brave young woman. Then, what happened? 3 years ago, they came back. Emma's voice drops to a whisper. Dad had been clean for years, but apparently the Death Riders were facing some kind of federal investigation. They needed him to provide alibis, testify that certain members were nowhere near certain crimes on specific dates. Dad refused. Grace's pulse quickens. Federal investigations mean serious crimes. Drugs, weapons, maybe worse. If Joey Wade had information valuable enough to threaten a federal case, his death was almost certainly not accidental. The night he died, Emma continues, her hands beginning to tremble, I heard motorcycles outside our house around midnight. I was in my bedroom, but the walls are thin, and I've always been able to hear better than most people. There were voices in the yard, angry voices demanding Dad come outside. Did you tell the police this? Emma laughs bitterly. I tried. The investigating officer said motorcycle noise was common in our neighborhood, that grief sometimes makes people imagine threatening scenarios where none exist. He suggested I focus on healing from my father's tragic accident instead of creating conspiracy theories. Grace's jaw clenches. She's heard that tone before. The patronizing dismissal that women and girls receive when they report genuine fears. The assumption that they're hysterical rather than observant. It's the same voice that told her black eyes were her fault, that staying with an abusive husband was better than being alone. But you know what you heard. I know what I heard, Emma says firmly. And I know my father didn't lose control of his motorcycle on a road he'd driven thousands of times. Dad was the most careful driver in the world, hyper-aware of safety because of my condition. He'd never speed on wet pavement, never take risks that might leave me fatherless. The conviction in her voice is absolute. This isn't a grieving daughter's wishful thinking, but an intelligent young woman's careful analysis. Grace believes her completely, which makes the situation exponentially more dangerous. If Emma is right, they're not dealing with garden variety motorcycle club harassment. They're hiding a witness to murder. Outside, the motorcycle engines have multiplied again. Grace counts at least 12 distinct sounds now, maybe more. The Death Riders are assembling for something bigger than casual intimidation. Her phone buzzes with a text message from Katie. "Mom, staying at Jess's house tonight for our history project. Don't wait up. Love you." Relief floods through Grace. At least her daughter is safe, away from whatever's about to happen. She shows Emma the message, and the girl's shoulders relax slightly. "Thank you for protecting her," Emma says softly. "I never wanted to put innocent people in danger." "You're innocent people too, honey." Grace reaches across the table again, squeezing Emma's hand. "Tell me about the federal investigation your father refused to support." Emma shifts uncomfortably. "I only heard fragments, pieces of phone conversations when Dad thought I was sleeping. Something about a witness protection program, about testifying against high-ranking members in exchange for relocation and new identities. Dad was terrified they'd hurt us if he cooperated, but also scared of what would happen if the investigation collapsed without his testimony. So he was caught between the federal agents and the Death Riders." "Exactly. And 3 weeks after that final conversation I overheard, his motorcycle crashed into Miller's Creek during a rainstorm." Emma's voice hardens. "Convenient timing, don't you think?" Grace thinks about Joey Wade's reputation. A man trying to build a clean life for his family, caught between competing pressures that would crush most people. A father desperate to protect his blind daughter and sick wife, facing impossible choices with no good outcomes. His death wasn't random tragedy, but calculated elimination. "What do you think he hid?" she asks again. Emma hesitates, then reaches into her jacket pocket. She withdraws a small flash drive, no bigger than her thumb. "I found this taped under my bedroom windowsill 2 days ago, along with a note in Braille that said, 'For Emma, when you're old enough to understand, this will protect you.'" Grace stares at the tiny device, understanding immediately why the Death Riders are so desperate to find it. "Have you looked at what's on it?" "I can't exactly look at anything," Emma says with dark humor, "but I took it to the library and used their accessibility software to convert the files to audio. There are financial records, photographs with timestamps, recorded conversations between Death Riders members discussing crimes I can't even repeat. Dad spent years documenting everything: names, dates, locations, detailed evidence of murders and drug trafficking and weapons deals. The flash drive represents Joey Wade's insurance policy, his attempt to protect his family even after death. But it's also Emma's death warrant if the wrong people discover she has it. Grace feels the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "Why didn't you give this to the federal agents?" "Because I don't know which federal agents to trust," Emma says simply. Dad's notes mention Death Riders having contacts inside law enforcement, people who provide information about investigations in exchange for money or threats. How do I know the person I give this to won't hand it right back to Marcus Sterling? Marcus Sterling. Grace has heard that name whispered in her diner's booths, always in connection with violence and fear. The Death Riders' local chapter president, a man whose reputation for cruelty extends far beyond motorcycle club politics. If Marcus Sterling wants Emma Wade dead, she won't survive the week without protection. "We need to call someone," Grace says, reaching for her phone. "Who?" Emma's laugh is bitter. "Local police are useless. Federal agents might be compromised, and I'm an 18-year-old blind girl with no money, no connections, and no one to trust except my 72-year-old grandmother." Grace starts to dial 911 anyway, but Emma's hand shoots across the table, covering the phone with surprising speed and accuracy. Please don't. Every call gets logged, and if there are Death Riders contacts inside the police department, they'll know exactly where I am within minutes. She's right, of course. Grace puts down the phone, mind racing through alternatives. Katie's father lives 3 states away and wouldn't help anyway. Her own family is scattered and distant. The church congregation includes several police officers, but Emma's warning about law enforcement corruption makes that option too risky. They're alone, facing a motorcycle club with dozens of members and unlimited willingness to use violence. 2 women, one middle-aged and tired, one young and blind, against an organization that's already committed murder to protect its secrets. The smart thing would be to give Emma the keys to Grace's car and wish her luck escaping to another state. Grace Stone has never been particularly smart about self-preservation. "All right," she says, settling back in the booth with renewed determination. "We're going to figure this out together. You're not facing this alone anymore, and I'm not abandoning you to those bastards outside. But first, I need to know everything. Every conversation you overheard, every detail you remember about the night your father died, every piece of information on that flash drive that might help us understand what we're dealing with." Emma's unseeing eyes fill with tears. "You don't understand what you're risking. I understand perfectly." Grace's voice carries the steel that got her through years of domestic violence, through single motherhood, through every crisis that tried to break her. "I understand that sometimes you have to choose between safety and doing what's right, and I've spent too many years choosing safety. Not today." Outside, the motorcycle engines rev in unison, a sound like thunder or like war drums. Grace counts 15 distinct engines now, maybe 20. The Death Riders are preparing for something, and Emma Wade is their target. But she'll have to go through Grace Stone first. The story Emma tells over the next hour paints a picture of systematic criminal enterprise disguised as motorcycle club brotherhood. The Death Riders aren't weekend riders who occasionally bend traffic laws, but a sophisticated organization involved in drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and contract killing across 3 states. Joey Wade's flash drive contains evidence of crimes spanning 15 years, enough to dismantle the entire operation and send dozens of members to federal prison. "Dad started documenting everything after I was born," Emma explains, her voice steady now that she's sharing the burden. "He knew he'd never be completely free of the Death Riders, but he wanted insurance in case they came after our family. Every conversation, every crime he witnessed or heard discussed, every financial transaction he became aware of, he recorded it all." Grace listens with growing horror as Emma describes murders disguised as accidents, witnesses who disappeared before testifying, police officers and court officials who accepted bribes to lose evidence or dismiss charges. The Death Riders operate with near impunity, protected by corruption and intimidation in equal measure. The federal investigation Dad was supposed to support would have used his evidence to indict 37 Death Riders members across 4 chapters, Emma continues. Without his testimony, the case collapsed. Most of the charges were dropped, and the few convictions that stuck resulted in minimal sentences. So his death wasn't just about silencing him. It was about protecting the entire organization. Exactly. And now they know I have the evidence Dad died protecting. Emma's fingers trace nervous patterns on the table. Marcus Sterling has been methodically eliminating everyone connected to Dad's cooperation with federal agents. I'm the last loose end. The weight of that responsibility settles heavily on Grace's shoulders. This isn't about helping a frightened teenager anymore. It's about holding evidence that could bring justice for murder victims whose deaths were disguised as accidents, whose families never learned the truth about what happened to them. Grace thinks about Joey Wade, a man who tried to escape criminal life for his daughter's sake, who spent years carefully documenting crimes he witnessed while building evidence that might someday protect his family. His death represents not just personal tragedy, but the collapse of justice for dozens of victims. "Why now?" she asks. "Why are they coming for you today specifically?" Emma's expression darkens. "Because Grandma Rose is dying. She has maybe weeks left, and once she's gone, there's no one to protect me. Marcus Sterling has been waiting for me to be completely alone and vulnerable." The cruelty of that calculation takes Grace's breath away. Marcus Sterling is waiting for an elderly woman to die so he can murder her blind granddaughter more easily. The patience required for such a plan speaks to a methodical evil that chills her to the bone. "We're not going to let that happen," Grace says firmly. "How can you stop it?" Emma's voice carries desperate hope mixed with realistic despair. "You're one woman with a teenage daughter and a diner to run. I can't ask you to risk everything for someone you barely know." Grace considers the question seriously, weighing her own safety against Emma's need, her daughter's security against the demands of conscience. The smart choice is obvious. Help Emma escape town, maybe give her some money and a car, then return to normal life and hope the Death Riders never connect Grace to Emma's disappearance. But looking at this brave young woman, Grace sees Katie in 10 years, intelligent and independent, despite facing obstacles that would crush weaker people. She sees herself at 18, desperate for someone to believe her, to stand with her against forces too big to face alone. She sees every woman who's ever been told her fears don't matter. Her voice doesn't count. Her life doesn't deserve protection. "Because you're not someone I barely know," Grace says finally. "You're Joey Wade's daughter, and he spent years building evidence to protect families from the Death Riders' violence. You're carrying his legacy, his hope that someday justice would prevail over intimidation. That makes you family." Emma's tears flow freely now, relief and gratitude mixing with persistent terror. What do we do? Grace glances toward the front window, where motorcycle headlights are beginning to cut through the afternoon shadows. More riders are arriving, the parking lot filling with chrome and leather. The Death Riders are committing significant resources to this operation, which suggests they consider Emma's elimination critical to their survival. First, we contact the one person who might be able to help without compromising your location, Grace says, reaching for her phone. "My ex-husband's brother is a federal prosecutor in the state capitol. If anyone knows which agents can be trusted with your father's evidence, it's him." She dials Robert Mackenzie's number from memory, hoping 3 years haven't changed his personal phone. He answers on the second ring, his voice cautious when he recognizes Grace's number. "Grace? Is everything all right? Rob, I need a favor. A big one. I'm sitting with someone who has evidence about Death Riders' criminal activities, the kind of evidence that could save lives and put murderers in prison. But she's scared local law enforcement might be compromised. Can you connect us with federal agents you personally trust?" The silence stretches long enough that Grace worries the call has dropped. When Robert speaks again, his voice carries new urgency. "Grace, where are you right now? Are you somewhere safe?" "Tucker's Diner on Main Street." "Why?" "Because 15 minutes ago, I got a call from a federal task force warning me that Marcus Sterling and approximately 40 Death Riders members were mobilizing for what intelligence suggests is an elimination operation. They're hunting someone with access to Joey Wade's evidence files. Grace's blood turns to ice. 40 Death Riders. Not the 15 or 20 she counted outside, but a small army organized specifically to kill Emma Wade. "They're already here," she whispers. "Listen to me carefully." Robert's voice sharpens with professional authority. "Do not leave that building under any circumstances. Federal agents are en route to your location, but they're at least 30 minutes away. Can you secure yourselves until help arrives?" Grace looks around the diner. Large windows on 3 sides, 2 exits that are already being watched, aging locks that wouldn't stop determined toddlers, much less armed bikers. Tucker's Diner is a trap, not a fortress. "Rob, they're going to come through those doors in the next few minutes," she says quietly. "Emma Wade is 18 years old and blind, and she's carrying evidence that could destroy the Death Riders organization. If something happens to us, make sure that evidence reaches people who can use it. Grace, don't do anything heroic. Just stay hidden and stay quiet until the cavalry arrives." But looking at Emma's face, Grace knows hiding isn't an option. The Death Riders have committed too much to this operation to be deterred by locked doors or closed signs. They're coming whether Grace cooperates or not, and when they do, Emma Wade will die, unless someone stands between her and 40 armed men. Grace Stone has spent her entire adult life avoiding confrontation, choosing safety over principle. But some choices define who you are, and some people are worth dying for. "Tell Katie I love her," she says into the phone, then hangs up before Robert can protest. Emma's face has gone pale, her exceptional hearing picking up conversations Grace can't distinguish. "They're talking about surrounding the building," she whispers. "Someone's giving orders about covering all the exits." Grace moves to the kitchen, checking the back door. Steel reinforced, dead-bolted from the inside, but ultimately just another obstacle that can be overcome with enough determination. The Death Riders have come prepared for a siege, and Tucker's Diner wasn't designed to withstand one. "What's the plan?" Emma asks, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. Grace returns to the booth, sitting across from this brave young woman who deserves so much better than the hand life has dealt her. She thinks about Katie, safe at her friend's house, and about Joey Wade, who died trying to protect his daughter from this exact scenario. She thinks about all the women who've been silenced by violence, all the witnesses who've been eliminated before they could speak truth to power. The plan is that Marcus Sterling and his army are going to learn what happens when they threaten someone under my protection, Grace says, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Your father spent years gathering evidence to bring these monsters to justice. We're going to make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Emma reaches across the table, her hand finding Grace's with unerring accuracy. I'm scared. So am I, honey. So am I. Outside, motorcycle engines rev in perfect synchronization, the sound of predators circling their prey. Through the blinds, Grace can see figures moving in the parking lot, coordinating positions, preparing for an assault. The Death Riders have brought overwhelming force to eliminate one blind teenager, which tells her everything she needs to know about how dangerous Emma's evidence really is. But they're about to discover that Emma Wade isn't facing them alone anymore. Grace Stone stands up, smoothing her apron with hands that shake only slightly, and walks to the front door. She unlocks it, steps outside into the late afternoon air, thick with exhaust fumes and menace, and looks directly at the man who can only be Marcus Sterling, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing Death Riders patches that proclaim his authority. Gentlemen, she says, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot, Tucker's diner is closed for the evening. You'll need to find somewhere else for dinner. Marcus Sterling's laughter echoes off chrome and concrete. Ma'am, we're not here for food. We're here for the girl inside that building. Hand her over, and nobody gets hurt. Grace feels the weight of 40 pairs of eyes, the presence of men who've killed before and won't hesitate to kill again. She thinks about Emma, brave and terrified, and carrying her father's legacy of hope for justice. She thinks about Katie, growing up in a world where women are expected to step aside when evil demands access to the innocent. "Over my dead body," Grace Stone says clearly. The words hang in the air like a challenge, like a promise, like a declaration of war. Marcus Sterling steps through the diner's front door with casual authority, his Death Riders patches gleaming under fluorescent lights. Behind him, Grace can see dozens of motorcycles arranged in perfect formation, their riders dismounted and waiting for orders. Emma's head snaps toward the sound of his footsteps, her face going ashen white with recognition. "You know who I am, don't you?" Marcus asks, his voice carrying the rough confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating others. He's tall and broad-shouldered, wearing expensive leather that can't quite disguise the violence lurking beneath his polished exterior. Emma's hands tremble as she clutches the flash drive. "I know your voice," she whispers. "You were there the night my father died." Grace positions herself between Marcus and the booth where Emma sits, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the windows, she can see more Death Riders moving into position, surrounding the building with military precision. Federal agents are still 20 minutes away. 20 minutes that might as well be 20 hours. "Smart girl," Marcus says, settling into a chair with deliberate casualness. "Always was bright, even as a baby. Joey used to brag about how quick you learned things, how you could identify people by their voices before you turned 2. The familiarity in his tone sends ice through Grace's veins. This isn't just another Death Riders member. This is someone who knew Emma as a child, who watched her grow up, who probably attended family barbecues and birthday parties. "You're not just after her father's evidence," Grace realizes aloud. "This is personal." Marcus's smile is cold as winter steel. "Joey Wade was my baby brother. We grew up together, rode together, built the Death Riders into what it is today. Then he decided his precious family was more important than the brotherhood that made him who he was." The revelation hits Emma like a physical blow. She gasps, pressing her hands to her mouth as understanding floods her face. "Uncle Marcus," she breathes. "Your Uncle Marcus." "Used to be," he says with casual cruelty. "Before your father decided to betray everything we built together. Before he chose to gather evidence against his own blood, his own brothers. Joey broke the most sacred rule of our organization. Family doesn't turn on family." Grace's mind races as pieces fall into place. Marcus Sterling wasn't just eliminating a witness. He was cleaning up a family betrayal that threatened his authority within the Death Riders' hierarchy. Emma represents not just dangerous evidence, but living proof that Marcus Sterling killed his own brother to maintain power. "So you murdered him," Emma says, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You killed your own brother because he wanted to protect his wife and daughter." "I killed a traitor who would have destroyed everything we'd spent decades building," Marcus snaps, his composure cracking slightly. "Joey had a choice: stand with his real family or side with federal agents who wanted to tear us apart. He chose wrong." The humanizing flaw from the outline becomes crystal clear. Marcus Sterling isn't a monster. He's a man so desperate to maintain respect within his organization that he committed fratricide rather than appear weak. The tragedy of it all makes Grace's heart ache even as terror courses through her veins. "Hand over that flash drive, and I'll make this quick," Marcus says, standing slowly. "Keep fighting me, and I'll make sure you suffer the way Joey should have suffered." Grace steps closer to Emma's booth, her protective instincts overriding every survival instinct. "Over my dead body," she repeats, her voice steady despite the 40 armed men surrounding them. Marcus's expression hardens. "If that's how you want it." That's when Grace reaches for the fire alarm mounted behind the counter, pulling it with all her strength. Sirens wail through the diner and across downtown Millbrook, bringing every volunteer firefighter and emergency responder racing toward Tucker's diner. At the same moment, Emma raises her smartphone, activating a live stream that broadcasts their situation to anyone following her social media account. "My name is Emma Wade," she says clearly into the phone's camera, "and Marcus Sterling of the Death Riders Motorcycle Club is here to murder me because I have evidence that he killed my father." The combination of fire alarm and live stream transforms their private terror into public crisis. Within minutes, police cars and fire trucks arrive, their sirens joining the cacophony as news spreads through social media. Marcus Sterling's calculated elimination has become a very public standoff that he can't win through violence alone. 3 months later, Grace Stone serves coffee in her new diner 200 miles away, watching Emma Wade navigate between tables with increasing confidence. The girl has learned to read customers' voices, to anticipate their needs, to move through the world with grace despite her disability. Marcus Sterling awaits trial for murder and racketeering charges, the Death Riders organization scattered by federal prosecutions built on Joey Wade's meticulously gathered evidence. The victory came with costs. Grace lost her job and her home, facing constant threats until federal marshals relocated them both to this small mountain town where nobody knows their story. Emma lives with round-the-clock protection, her testimony too valuable to risk. She'll spend years in courtrooms reliving her father's death to ensure justice for his murder. But they found family in each other. 2 women who stood against overwhelming odds and somehow survived. Grace watches Emma laugh with customers, sees the strength that tragedy couldn't break, and knows Joey Wade would be proud of the daughter he died protecting. Some battles are worth fighting, even when victory changes everything. Some people are worth protecting, even when protection comes at tremendous cost. Grace Stone learned that lesson when she looked into Emma Wade's unseeing eyes and saw not just a frightened girl, but the future of justice itself. The story continues, but the ending has already been written in courage. On quiet afternoons, when the mountain diner fills with golden sunlight and the sound of Emma's laughter, Grace sometimes thinks about that terrible day when 40 motorcycles surrounded Tucker's old place. She remembers the weight of impossible choices, the moment when doing right mattered more than staying safe. The local newspaper keeps their story alive, inspiring other small-town heroes who refuse to let evil flourish in silence. Emma has started college online, studying criminal justice with the fierce determination of someone who's seen corruption defeated by ordinary people with extraordinary courage. She speaks at conferences now, her voice steady as she tells audiences about fathers who sacrifice everything for their children's safety, about women who stand between predators and the innocent. Grace watches her surrogate daughter grow stronger each day, knowing Joey Wade's legacy lives on through every life his evidence helped save, every victim who finally received justice. Their diner has become a sanctuary for others fleeing violence, a place where courage is served alongside coffee and hope never runs out. The Death Riders chapter disbanded completely after Marcus Sterling's conviction, their reign of terror ended by one man's love for his daughter and two women's refusal to surrender to fear.